Baylor football is in a make or break season under head coach Dave Aranda. Last season was flat out disappointing, finishing the year 5-7. They did not start off on a strong note with a 38-24 loss to an Auburn football team that ended up going 5-7 as well. This was not a good year for the Baylor Bears, and quite frankly, that was the year to make a push potentially into the college football playoff. The talent was there. The coaching staff had a lot of continuity and consistency. So looking ahead to 2026, I definitely think this is going to be the year that the coaching staff loses their job if they don't perform. So let's go back and let's talk about the Baylor portal class, what they've lost, and then highlight, maybe the outlook onto next season based off of last year. So for starters, they are losing several players to the transfer portal. Bryson Washington highlights the entire class. He was the RB1 there for Baylor. I expected him to have a much bigger season, but I'll get into why he didn't later in this video. 2,000 total scrimmage yards and 20 touchdowns over the last 3 seasons. This is a guy who was the main producer in the run game. He was capable in the receiving game, but there just wasn't a lot of space for it, especially last year. So Washington transfers over to Auburn, where I believe he's due for a breakout season there. Next up, we've got Colton Price, starting offensive lineman for the past 2 seasons. I think he started 24 games total. He's seen action in over 2,000 plus snaps for Baylor. This was an anchor for their offensive line. He transfers to Kentucky. That is a major loss there. Then on the defensive side of the football in the transfer portal, Keaton Thomas, 205 total tackles over his last 2 seasons. I believe he's going into his redshirt junior year, if not his redshirt senior year. He transfers over to Ole Miss, where Pete Golding is really going to express his talents there. Only a 3-star transfer. Definitely thought he should have been a 4-star. His production definitely values it as such. I know his PFF grade was not that high, but I would blame that more on the Baylor scheme than I would him as an individual player. So now let's talk about some of the draft prospects that have left Baylor either due to no eligibility or they're just putting their name into the draft. Sawyer Robertson, over the last 2 seasons, 6,700 passing yards, 67 total touchdowns, I believe 58 or 59 in the air, and 8 or so on the ground. In my opinion, he was one of the best quarterbacks in college football. I know he's got a lot of turnovers, but Baylor really did not put him in a lot of places to succeed in terms of game script. They were down a lot of these games throughout the season, forcing him to pass the ball. And when you're forced to pass the ball, defense is really key in on that, and they can, get to the passer quickly, and they can also, hone in their defensive backs, their alignments, their coverages, and it just makes it so much harder to pass the football. So Robertson, in my opinion, one of the underrated quarterbacks in this year's draft, definitely would have been the best quarterback in the Big 12, in my opinion, returning to his team for this upcoming season, but I think he ran out of eligibility, so he goes to the draft. Meanwhile, his comrades there on the offensive side of the football, Josh Cameron and Michael Trigg, combined together over the last 2 and 3 seasons, 3,300 total receiving yards, and I think 28 or 29 receiving touchdowns. These were 2 major focal points of the offense, especially the passing game. I actually did an NFL draft profile for Michael Trigg already on my YouTube channel. Be sure to check that out. I think these guys are extremely explosive. They didn't have the gaudy numbers that some other players ended up having, but regardless, I thought that both of these players are exceptional in the pass game. This is, looking at it holistically on the offense, you're losing probably roughly 70% of your offensive production in the transfer portal. And then on the offensive line, of course, several players outside of Colton Price entered the transfer portal, some depth pieces as well as potential starters for next year. That's not good. Now, incoming in the transfer portal, there's really not that much to write home about. Some underrated guys, wide receiver from Oklahoma State, a wide receiver from Kentucky, I believe. But I mean, both of those guys had a combined 400 yards last year. It's not like, you're bringing in a couple 1,000-yard receivers from, the SWAC or anything like that. No ghost guys to look out for. I'm curious to see what Baylor's offense looks like next season, but the only real highlight from the transfer portal was DJ Lagway. Defensively, of course, going to the draft as well. Kind of an edge rusher, more of just a classic defensive end. I mean, he's over 300 pounds. Jackie Marshall, in his 3 years there at Baylor, 3 active years at Baylor, he had 94 tackles and 5 sacks. Not exactly the biggest producer, but still a player that had production value, and he's taking his talents to the draft, I believe. Maybe he's coming back for another season. I digress. The other highlights that I've talked about here and all these other players, major producers. So let's talk about what Baylor just did not do well last year at all. Defensively, they were atrocious, and it started with the front seven. They were god-awful against the run. These are all Big 12 stats here. They allowed the second most rushing yards. They allowed the most rushing touchdowns. They were the second worst in the conference in yards per rush. In their 7 losses, by the way, I'm just going to read this off to you. 244 yards per game on the ground, ladies and gentlemen. 216 yards given up to Houston, 380 rushing yards giving up to Utah, 307 rushing yards given up to Auburn. I mean, Jackson Arnold could not be stopped. Everybody was thinking maybe this guy is a Heisman Trophy candidate after that game. Then, of course, 265 given up to Cincinnati. There's just a lot of spots here where the run defense was honestly non-existent, and I put a lot of that blame onto Dave Aranda and the defensive staff. They did not set up this defense for success, and they had some fairly talented guys. It's not like they were getting outsized by their Big 12 counterparts. Baylor is a top-tier program in the Big 12. Did not perform that way at all. Not to mention, we're talking about the front seven here. That was the main problem for Baylor's defense. Could not get to the passer. These are FBS stats right here. 4th fewest sacks in all of college football. 5th fewest takeaways in all of college football. Could not generate pressure, could not generate fumbles. Obviously, due to both of those things being a factor, the quarterback for the opposing team had all day to sit back there. Not to mention, he didn't have to pass the ball that much because they just kept pounding the rock. I believe Baylor ranked 130th out of 136 FBS schools for pass play percentage by the opponent. It was like 42%. Teams just went up early on this Baylor team, and so they were forced to pass the ball a ton. This is why Bryson Washington didn't have the quote-unquote breakout year that a lot of people thought that he would. But the offense, I thought that they were not that terrible. Jake Spatfatal, the offensive coordinator, I believe in last year's preview that I had for Baylor, I highlighted him. He's been a lot of different places. He was Jared Goff's offensive coordinator back at Cal, went to Texas State and was the head coach there for a little while, but came to be Baylor's offensive coordinator back in 2024, and in my opinion, has taken Baylor's offense to new heights. Now, of course, they're not winning these games, but they're shootouts nonetheless. Baylor's offense, 3rd in the conference in total yards per game, 5th in the conference in scoring, and 1st in the conference in pass yards per game. Now, once again, a lot of that has to do to the fact that Baylor was forced to pass the ball throughout the majority of these games because by the end of the first quarter and middle of the second quarter, they were already down 10-plus points. So I understand where the offense is at. However, I do think that there's a lot of upside here for the offense next year. DJ Lagway, in my opinion, more talented than Sawyer Robertson. Maybe not as refined as he is, but the things that he needs to work on are, completion percentage, short pass accuracy, good decision making. There's a lot of turnovers here. But here's the thing. DJ Lagway, if he's forced to pass the ball 40 plus times a game next season, he's not going to be able to cut down on his turnovers. No quarterback is in this spot when you're down 10 plus points and you're being forced to try to save the game or bring your team back from the brink of defeat. That is the major problem. So the number one improvement that must happen next season is the defensive front seven. Now, incoming through the transfer portal, I did not see a ton of like star potential there. I don't even have anybody written down as a highlight for the front seven. It's just going to have to be growth and development from the players that were already there. Maybe you can get a couple guys from the portal that end up being stars, but it's hard to see that would happen for Baylor over the offseason. I just one offseason is not enough time to grow and develop guys into full-time starters playing in a Power 4 conference. That's what I'm majorly worried about. And then I look at the schedule here. They have Auburn in a game. It's a neutral site game, but it's in Atlanta, so Auburn will definitely have the home field advantage there. Prairie View A&M, sure, that's a dub. Louisiana Tech, win. Colorado at home, most likely a win. So if you could beat Auburn and start the season off 4-0, this is actually, when I was talking about Baylor last year, I predicted them to go 10-2. And I do X Factor games. My X Factor game last year was Auburn. It was the first game of the season. It's at home. It is a trend-setting game for how the program will move on throughout the season. The exact same thing will be said here about Baylor. 2026, they have got to beat Auburn in game one, and that's going to be hard to do because you're traveling a long distance. You've got an entire new offensive group putting together throughout the offseason. This is their first game together. DJ Lagway has not done a good job at the beginning of seasons. He struggled last year versus USF and Miami and LSU to start the year. So in a new system with a turnover-happy quarterback, there's a lot of question marks here for the Baylor Bears. I just don't know if they can win that game. If they can and start 4-0, then sure, it looks like a stronger season, and maybe Dave Aranda saves his job once again. But at Arizona State, extremely tough game. At Kansas, I know there's a lot of offensive production leaving Kansas, but still, I think that's a really tough game to win. At BYU, Texas Tech, and at Houston to close the season, that's where the going gets tough, and I think that's where the bread is probably buttered for Dave Aranda's hot seat. If you get to that point, last 3 games of the season, and you're 5-4, and you can finish on a strong note and somehow finish 8-4, then I believe Aranda can save his job. But if you are anything less than that, and you go out and lose these games, 2 out of the 3, or maybe even all 3 of them, I think the hopes for this Baylor Bears staff is completely chalked. They'll be starting over again. You know, what a crazy turn of events for Baylor football. Just a few years ago, they looked like a potential Big 12 powerhouse. But of course, all of that stuff goes down with the sexual assault allegations. I believe the coaching staff gets fired. They have to hire Dave Aranda. And since then, it's just been up and down season one after another. And I'm hoping for the best for the Baylor Bears. I want them to be a successful team. I like watching them when they're at their best. But outlook-wise, it just does not look very good for 2026. I think Dave Aranda and the staff will probably be looking for new jobs by the end of next season. But like I said, hoping for the best. That's my outlook for 2026 for Baylor football. Let me know what you think of the roster layout for next season, as well as what they can do to fix the problems from last year. But be sure to like and subscribe. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we will see you next time.